Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. As a bit of background, we at Digital Law are a niche law firm specialising and working solely in technology and cybersecurity related issues. In each episode, we look at recent stories in the news related to digital technology from around the world, with a specific emphasis on data protection and very much cybersecurity standpoint. So for more information on the stories that we are covering this week, please check the links in our show notes. By way of an introduction, I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright. And once, Peter, you introduce yourself, we'll dive into what we're going to cover this week.
Thank you, Amelia. My name is Peter. I'm a solicitor and the Managing Director at Digital Law, and we've got a couple of, I think, quite high-profile things to discuss this week, so I'll pass back to Amelia.
Thanks, Peter. So one of the first stories we'll be taking a look at this week is the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act and the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Security Requirements for Relevant Connectable Products Regulation 2023. Only a short mouthful there. We'll also be taking a look at the TikTok ban, TikTok Lite usage, the Dropbox cyber attack, and the US Debt Collection Agency cyber attack. So a good couple of stories to cover this week. But before we dive into today's stories, here's just some background information on our podcast producer, Anson Evaluate. So Anson Evaluate are a consultancy company offering a variety of services, including data protection training, outsourced data protection officer services, and specialising in and advising clients from all over the world. So now that we've covered that, let's dive straight into our first story. So this is looking at the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Act and the accompanying Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Security Requirements for Relevant Connectable Product Regulation 2023. Sorry, that's very much a mouthful here. But so what does the Act actually do? So the Acts are looking to kind of specifically in black and white impose duties on manufacturers, importers and distributors of connectable products. When we're talking about connectable products, we're thinking about the Internet of Things and, the products that we have in our house. I think, Peter, when we discussed that, you had quite a few that you thought, we were looking at.
So we're looking at everything from, your smart doorbell, the Ring doorbell, through to if you've got a smart meter. Dealing with your heating and your boiler, through to things like the smart light switches, smart toasters, smart toothbrushes, even. What used to be just a lump of plastic with some bristles on is now, you can spend hundreds of pounds on very sophisticated Bluetooth-enabled, internet-enabled toothbrushes that will tell you how long you've been brushing for and have you been brushing correctly, and then you can harangue your child if you don't think that they've brushed their teeth for long enough, and you've got real-time data to back it up. It's a great time to be alive. But the point is that loads of technology that 15, 20 years ago was just inert, sat in your home, is now connected to the internet, collecting data and doing something with it. And this legislation is an attempt to try and put a bit of a regulatory wrapper around the fact that we've got such a large volume of data being collected about our day-to-day use of typical household equipment.
Thanks, Peter. So when we're talking about the use of these Internet of Things products, the specific regulations here look at applying a variety of security requirements and then actually enforcing these. So, for example, the new laws will mean that manufacturers and other people kind of creating the products will have to ensure that where, for example, routers require a password, that these passwords are able to be changed readily and easily to protect the infrastructure of a product, because, everyone now has a Wi-Fi router. And actually, in terms of hacking and cyber attacks, it's fairly easy to, find the keys, guess kind of readily made passwords. And equally, it also means that where you have an Internet of Things product, that specific passwords are not accepted. For example, if you use password as a password or admin or something readily guessable,
yes,
this should not be allowed at all.
Yeah. So it's the idea of making sure that those passwords, which can usually be cracked by password breaking software in seconds, instead it will be, you'll have to end up having something that takes a little bit longer to be hacked, to be guessed. But at least that still the vast majority of passwords used tend to be those very easy ones. So it's the idea of making it mandatory that systems simply will not accept those easy to crack passwords, and hopefully sort of raise security across the board. Is the theory. The practice will mean that it sort of almost puts an extra hurdle in the way of unpacking and starting to use your new bit of equipment. If now it's, so you spend hundreds of pounds on your new toothbrush and you want to get it set up, but you've got to, of course, set up the profile and set up all of these things. And then the password will have to be something you can still remember for future reference. But then it could be that it says, you have to have a minimum number of characters and have to have a minimum number of non-alphanumeric characters in there. And you can't have these, you can't have that. So it will actually just mean that for a lot of people, it just kind of makes that initial setup of a product somewhat even more onerous than it already is.
Well, Peter, it's funny you mentioned the whole onerous thing. So manufacturers must also produce a statement of compliance that includes quite a lot of information alongside the product. So when we think about what this should be included is kind of the product, so the type, the batch, name and address of each manufacturer of the product. So if you've got something like a toothbrush and you've got lots of different products integrated into one, you're going to need a breakdown of each part of the manufacturing product. A declaration that the statement of compliance is prepared on or on behalf of the manufacturer of the product. Other declarations as well as a defined period for support for the product and the date and place of issue of the statement of compliance. So essentially this massive piece of paper that says we do this, this and this, here's how to contact us, here's how to report problems with the product, which sounds great, but if you have just got this brand new product and you're trying to set it up, will you look at this poxy piece of paper that says all of this? In actual fact, not only would you look at it, would you even look at it and not just throw it away?
Well, exactly, because classically we've always got the instruction manual or the instructions that no one ever reads. We already have mandated by different governments around the world the instructions that come with medicine. How many people actually sit and read through the list of things that says, this is your medicine, this is what you are, make sure you only take the number of pills, how and when prescribed by your doctor, make sure you finish the course, make sure that you only take the amount that you've been prescribed to, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff that very often people don't sit and read through.
As my inner cynic, I actually am that poor sad person that will sit there and read the reams, but I think I'm on my own there.
Just to work out the list of side effects and things.
Oh yes, yeah.
But but that's just it. Like the majority of people, it's just you get it. Okay, that's the bit that goes in the bin, along with the box, and then you work your way through the meds. And how many people actually sit and read it? And this is almost like saying, and we're giving you an extra piece of paper that you can then ignore.
Yeah.
I mean, already now when it comes to and certainly the sort of equipment that we're talking about here, very often you don't even get a actual how to use guide. Very often that's now, go to the app or you go to the website and you can then access the manual for your product there, which means that then the stuff you actually get in the box is please make sure that you treat the battery in a certain way so it doesn't blow up. If it is a toothbrush, for example, be careful about having, cables and plugs and things in the bathroom, and make sure you don't electrocute yourself.
But again, that's even if you read any of that stuff.
Yeah, and so it's just almost exactly putting it together it's the wodge of stuff that will be swiftly ignored. In the busy household, but nonetheless, it's just adding to that. We could go down the rabbit hole of overly regulating things, but we appear to be there already.
Yeah, and I mean, another point that is included within these set of regulations is the fact that importers and distributors have a duty to ensure that the product does come with this accompanying statement, and where they do not come with the statement doesn't come with the product, then that product is not available for purchase, which is an interesting point. But again, it goes back to the fact that, okay, say that manufacturers make sure that this statement of compliance does go out with the product. Are people really going to be reticent of this? Probably not.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it is going to be enforced by the Office for Product Safety and Standards. They will be, they're a part of the Department for Business and Trade, who already enforce the UK's existing product safety regulations. And they'll be taking a risk-based approach to the enforcement of the new law. But as we were discussing, Peter, it could be quite interesting in terms of the approach that they actually decide to take in practice. Yeah,
I mean, at first I thought, another new regulator, yay. But as you say, this is an existing regulator that actually appears to be an existing desk inside the Department of Business and Trade. what's the Department of Business and Trade? That's the one that's basically been the Department of Trade and then various other names for the last 30 years and broken up and put back together and various different things. But the point is, it's the Trade Department, it's a desk in there that looks at this, which might actually, you'd hope, be a better way of doing this than the more popular way of regulating in the last 20 years, which is where you end up sort of setting up an arm's length regulator in a separate office with separate infrastructure and a separate logo that sometimes isn't quite as determined or doesn't necessarily want to regulate and enforce in the way that the government might have envisaged at the outset. So let's hope the fact that this is an existing regulator rather than a new one being created, and the fact that it's just more powers being added to it, and the fact it isn't an arm's length regulator, but is in fact seems to be more closely tied to the Department of Trade, hopefully means we'll get effective regulation and enforcement when it comes to these requirements. But then again, how effective will it be if, oh, this product didn't have the new compulsory leaflet in it telling you about what it does? Is that really going to have a big impact for the consumer?
I mean, who knows? But at least in terms of the passwords and the fact that that will be kind of a regulatory thing, that hope is that our Internet of Things devices will have a significant barrier in terms of protection, and at least then, while the onus might be on the consumer a little bit more in terms of building cyber resilience, which is essentially the purpose behind these regulations, it is going to be bolstering that. And I think that is the main takeaway, that while yes, there will be some fancy bits of paper that actually don't apply to most, at least at the bare minimum, hopefully this password protection will actually, in practice,
hopefully it will lift the level of security around these IoT devices, platforms and systems. And hopefully it reduces the possibility of the more extreme products like the My Friend Kayla doll, which a few years ago was quite widespread in Europe, and now you can only buy it, well, you can only see a version of it in the East German Spying Museum, because this was the internet-enabled smart toy that you could put in your child's playpen or cot, and it would see and speak to your child, and could be easily hacked by anyone with a Bluetooth device up to 40 feet away from the product, and you didn't need a password or anything to get on. You just used your phone to connect to it, and then you can speak to a child. So we can see why that ended up being no longer on sale. But in a similar way, because of the vast amount of data these systems are collecting, we therefore want to have these slightly more clear guardrails in place so that you don't get poor quality products that are not properly protecting this level of data. And given the fact that we now have everything from smartwatches to seemingly smart everything else collecting this sort of data, then certainly having these more beefed up rules seems to be a good idea.
No, I definitely agree. And I'm sure we will see more I think the regulations only came into full effect on the 29th of April, so only a few days ago. So I think in the coming weeks and months, we'll certainly see how this is going to work in practice, and also the level of enforcement that does eventually come out. But moving swiftly on to our next story, we are looking at the TikTok ban. So Congress have approved a bill that gives its parent company two options: sell it to an approved buyer or see it banned. And President Joe Biden has signed the legislation into law. However, it could take years for the TikTok ban to officially go into effect, since the Chinese-owned parent company ByteDance is likely to challenge the statute in court. So according to the statute's current language, ByteDance would have 9 months to divest and find an American buyer for TikTok once the bill is signed into law, which it has been. On top of that, the president can push back the deadline by an additional 90 days, so there's a bit more wiggle room here. But that means without sale, the soonest TikTok could be shut down in the US would be around a year from now, roughly. But it's a little bit more complicated in that, because ByteDance could sue or block the implementation of the statute, which it has said it will do. And after this, the bill will be taken up by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And obviously it then has to go through the full appeals process, and the DC court issuing its ruling, whichever side loses, is probably wanting to take this further, requesting a review by the US Supreme Court, which again, we're looking at another year, maybe more, which would basically stall this whole thing. And maybe the earliest we could be looking at here is 2026.
You mean looking at a major piece of legislation that could be gummed up and stuck in the courts for a long period of time? Because that never happens.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So this is the thing. In fairness, that I think President Donald Trump wanted to look at banning TikTok, and of course, if it was that would have been back in sort of 2019, 2020. President Biden has actually got this through with support from both houses. So from that point of view, it's a win. I think it's got a rare thing with a level of bipartisan support. And it's gone through, and now the clock ticks, albeit comparatively slowly. And as you say, Amelia, TikTok, ByteDance has already indicated its intention to challenge. So this could end
Absolutely.
up, we could end up with several years worth of litigation on this. The point is, though, that you've now got the optics of the government in the US, the federal government, saying we are taking action on this. The status quo is not acceptable, and already you've got a lot of European governments that have turned around and said that TikTok shouldn't be installed on government-owned mobile devices because of concerns around their data collection and sharing practices, with the potential application of the Chinese national security law, meaning that ByteDance could technically be compelled to provide data that has been collected from TikTok to the Chinese government. So that's where all of this sort of concern comes from. And of course, it's things like the Chinese national security law being applied in Hong Kong that's led to concerns there with regards to the application of freedom. And so these are very real concerns. And therefore, the big manifestation of that has been TikTok, due to its massive success and its massive growth in terms of users. Indeed, I think, Amelia, you were saying that the US is probably seen as certainly the biggest and most valuable market for TikTok, despite the fact it is a platform that has been phenomenally successful around the world.
Absolutely. I definitely think in terms of, if we're looking at the different types of markets, the US market is absolutely massive because of the level of use. And I mean, I think I was saying to you, Peter, the fact that actually TikTok is not just gamification, just endless scrolling platform anymore. TikTok have their own TikTok shop where companies are buying into this, and therefore, you've got massive brands that are then selling their products through TikTok. And therefore, it's more than just a social media network for ByteDance here. And when we're thinking, okay, are they going to have the funds to fight this? Well, where America is such a massive market, where you've got, like I said, more than just a social media platform, I really think they're going to want to do this, because I think we discussed earlier about the fact that the domino effect that the precedent set in the US could have across the rest of the world could be massive. And given the stance that the US has taken, I really do think that TikTok is going to want to fight.
Yes. So indeed, this could get drawn out. You've also got the fact that TikTok as a whole has a very young user base, hoovering up teenagers, young adults, and if having hoovered up those users as they then work through the education system, enter the workplace, start earning, become gradually more affluent, you've got the fact that that is a very powerful demographic. They're hoovering up users who are no longer going along to Meta's various platforms. They're more engaged on TikTok and providing and generating and sharing content on there. And that's why, as you quite rightly say, this is an argument worth having, a fight worth having as far as ByteDance is concerned. I suppose we should talk a little bit about, okay, so the legislation says they have to divest, so you don't necessarily have to switch off TikTok as a platform.
No, not at all.
It could be sold.
Yeah.
There have been stories in the press, publicly available, saying that there are consortiums being put together that will be interested in buying this.
I mean, it's certainly a very profitable platform. ByteDance would not be fighting this, or would not have even, batted an eyelash if it was not a platform worth fighting for. So, people that would be wanting to invest here, they see that it's already a moneymaker. Therefore, in, broad terms, they're investing in a sure thing.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I think that's interesting, though, to bear in mind is that we could here have ownership moving from ByteDance, ultimately with its offices in China, instead being moved across to a US corporation. TikTok itself is based in the US Virgin Islands, with a board majoritively made up of US investors and directors who are US citizens. However, there have been persistent stories with regards to the volume of data that TikTok collects, the fact that it is very much behavioral data, the fact that it is, you know, like Meta's apps, these things collect an awful lot of information from the mobile device that it is being operated on. And there is, I think, the question mark of whether you can move across on paper the ownership from China to the US. But you've still got a system that has been designed and engineered over the last decade to operate in a certain way. And you have to ask, well, what happens to all of the data flows? Will they automatically no longer be going to hardware or infrastructure that could still be used for ultimate collection and transfer of data and its potential reviewing in China? Who knows? I just raised this question. I mean, we were just talking about IoT devices earlier on, Amelia.
Yeah.
An awful lot of IoT devices, unbeknownst to their manufacturers, they will have incorporated hardware, chips, etc., that actually then transmit data back to China, and the manufacturer is totally unaware of that. So you could end up with a similar thing here of then a US-owned TikTok still transmitting data, and certainly its own ownership and managers might not be fully aware of the data collection practices and mechanisms that are built in. Bearing in mind that with any piece of software, it is written and coded in a certain way, and this is the reason why one developer, one business will very often not take on someone else's product or code because they didn't write it and they don't know for sure what's in there.
I think that's just it, and I'm sure we will be covering this story again, as it continues to unfold, because like we said, there's likely to be pushback, and actually dependent on the outcome, we might even still be talking about this in 2 years' time, but dependent on the outcome, it could very well be what actually are the consequences of the decision that is actually made.
Yeah.
But sticking with TikTok still, we covered last week TikTok Lite, and TikTok Lite has now been suspended in Spain, France, so essentially the EU, and it's taken the similar turn to what we discussed in the fact that, according to TikTok, you were only able to participate in the program if you're over the age of 18. However, we questioned whether the age verification of and the mechanisms in place here would actually be enough to prevent children from signing up. And we came to the conclusion, probably not, as has the EU's Digital Services Act and the Commission. They came to the same conclusion.
So it looks therefore that the easier decision of let's just pull this rather than trying to fit the square peg into the round hole, which I think would have been a lot more difficult to do. So we had that feeling that risk assessments wouldn't have been comprehensively carried out to the point of being able to demonstrate, look, we can demonstrate here that children are not being paid to access and undertake this work. And clearly they couldn't demonstrate that in a way that satisfied the regulator, and hence we are where we are. I mean, it's happened all very, very quickly, and clearly it's an example here of clearly it wasn't possible to defend the indefensible.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that pretty much covers that story fairly quickly.
I think so.
So moving on to the Dropbox cyber attack. So Dropbox has revealed a major attack on its systems that saw customers' personal information accessed by unknown and unauthorized entities. So the attack, detailed in the regulatory filing, impacted Dropbox Sign, a service that is essentially an e-signature solution that lets you send, sign, and store important documents in one seamless workflow, even without ever leaving Dropbox. So basically a DocuSign clone. The filing states that the management became aware of the incident last week on April 24th and immediately activated cybersecurity incident response to investigate, contain, and remediate the incident. So in terms of who has been affected here, so the threat actor had access data relating to all users of Dropbox Sign, such as emails, usernames, and general account settings. And for subsets of users, the threat actor also accessed phone numbers, hash passwords, certain authentication information, API keys, tokens, etc. And kind of to add insult to injury as well, it revealed that third parties who received or signed a document through Dropbox Sign but never even created an account also had email address and names exposed. Allegedly, Dropbox have found no evidence that the attackers actually accessed the contents of user accounts, such as agreements, templates, or payment information, which is, I mean, good news in amongst all of that. But, they could not conceivably use handle contracts with data or commercial secrets. So, quite an interesting one to unpack there.
It is. I think this is an example of the fact that we now have the use of e-signatures very much prevalent across the economy. Even now, within the legal profession, they're far more widely used when it comes to documents, wills, affidavits, etc. To use an e-signature rather than doing a wet signature in person. And increasingly now, it's only in some aspects of sort of finance, insurance, and also in sort of the medical profession and in medical research that you very often still require the wet in-person signature. So therefore, we've had this sort of big move towards e-signatures driven by, lockdown and the fact that you couldn't all get into one room easily. And yet, in this instance, one of the big providers of this service, in terms of Dropbox's product here, has been compromised. So a bit of a salutary lesson on the fact that where we very often do receive a lot of information now in terms of, here's the link, please sign, press here, sign, and it's all done. Bearing in mind that these systems are not entirely 100% secure. I think it's a bit of a wake-up call to the companies that use them to make sure that, perhaps just review and see how secure those systems really are, because of course you do want to be able to demonstrate to all of your clients, users, that the platform and systems you are relying on are as efficient as possible, in particular if you're in a highly regulated sector, so like, say, something like law, accounting, medicine, finance, insurance, financial services, banking. This is the sort of thing that could otherwise prove to be quite embarrassing. Maybe an issue for Dropbox. They have, I think, hoovered up quite a large part of the market when it comes to this product, and will it affect market confidence in that? I think that's one of the reasons why they've had to go public with this, because ordinarily you tend to find that if they can, they don't necessarily end up going public with these sorts of breaches. Though, of course, you have to go public if it's in Europe as opposed to the US, where very often people don't go public with news of a data protection breach.
Be interesting to see as well whether the ICO pick this up as well, with it being such a widespread breach, and see whether they issue any sort of enforcement or any warnings. But I'm sure we will cover that in the coming days, weeks.
It wouldn't surprise me if a reprimand was coming on the way there, but who knows.
So moving on to our final story, we are moving over to the US, to a US debt collection agency who have experienced a cyber attack. So an American debt collection agency suffered a data breach in late February, losing sensitive data belonging to almost 2 million people. Yes, you heard that correctly, 2 million people. So earlier this week, Financial Business and Consumer Solutions sent a data breach notification letter to affected customers, explaining that unauthorized third parties accessed its system on the 14th of February and remained there until being spotted and ousted on February the 26th. So we're talking about almost 2 weeks here. And then during these 2 weeks, the unnamed threat actors harvested sensitive information on almost 2 million people, including full names, social security numbers, birth dates, account information, driver's license numbers, and ID card numbers, all of which affected individual US citizens. So there's not been any real word on who the attackers are and how they access the company infrastructure, or if, essentially no hacking group has taken responsibility for the breach. But in terms of the next steps, the FBSC said it would do the usual, analyze the incident, tighten up on security, offer identity protection and credit monitoring to the affected individuals, and ironically enough, provide guidance on how to best protect against identity theft and fraud.
Now, interesting here, this is US, I mean, all of the affected data subjects are US citizens, we understand from the press coverage, which is quite interesting because usually you get US corporations that don't want to go public about this sort of breach unless they are publicly listed. And from the quick research you've done, I don't believe that this company is publicly listed, but their response reads far more like the response you would get from a company dealing with European style data protection, whereby they're wanting to report it, get on the front foot. They're showing that they have provided support to the affected data subjects, giving them access to different platforms so they can check whether their credit ratings being affected, or if there are other issues that might be happening. So they do seem to be trying to get on the front foot where possible with this. One quite salutary lesson there is when you look at this company's website, you see that they have all of the usual accreditations you would expect to see. So things like PCI DSS certification, as well as ISO 27001. And the number of times I speak to companies that go, oh, well, we are spending a huge amount having got ISO 27001, or we have PCI DSS, or in the UK, they say, oh, we've got Cyber Essentials, so we don't have to worry. And it's like, no, just because you've got the accreditation doesn't mean that the worst can't happen. And in this instance, even though they had ISO 27001, even though they had PCI DSS, someone got into their network, and not only did they get in there, they were in there for 2 weeks looking at data and exfiltrating it. So it just goes to show you can have quite robust compliance measures in place, but it doesn't mean that you aren't going to find you're on the end of a fairly sizable breach of this type.
And so that was our last discussion for the episode. And if you have any questions about anything we've discussed today, please feel free to email us at admin@digitallawuk.com. And summary of today's stories are available on our website as well as the links to the original stories, which do have more contextual information. And if you would like to hear more from us, including information about subscriber-only podcasts, webinars, and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. Big thank you to Anson Evaluate helping to produce this podcast. And if you'd be interested to hear more about Anson Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.ansonevaluate.com. And just a final reminder, these episodes are available on our website, YouTube channel, podcast channels as well, such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and Google Podcasts. And please feel free to leave us a review. Thank you for listening, and we hope to be back next week.